We're going to look at a vitally important topic in true education, a topic perhaps often overlooked, but one that is arguably one of the most important elements of true education because it lays the foundation. And without the correct foundation, you've started off wrong, and it's much more difficult without the right foundation. So let's begin with a word of prayer because we need the Lord's help. Our Father in heaven, we are again grateful for the privilege to be here, grateful for this event, grateful for your many blessings to us, grateful for the wonderful speakers and presentations we've been listening to. It's truly amazing how you continue to feed us from your word. And Lord, as we consider this important topic in true education, I pray that you'll send your Spirit to guide our minds. Lord, may we truly understand the import of these topics and apply them to our lives. And I ask again that you'll speak through me. May this message and these words be from you. For it's in Jesus' name I ask and pray. Amen. We're told in the book Child Guidance that the lessons learned and the habits formed during the years of infancy and childhood have more to do with the formation of the character and the direction of the life than have all the instruction and training of after years. Maybe we've read this before, I don't know. It's somewhat of a familiar statement. But I think perhaps we don't quite pause to think just how significant it is. Do you realize that word, what that word all means? It says the lessons learned, the habits formed during the early years have more to do with forming the character and the direction of the life than all the instruction and training of after years. Those early years are a vital window of time. For this reason, the Lord gave us instruction in that 1872 message. This was part of the very beginning message of true education, and it was continually repeated all the way through all the messages on true education that we received. It was specifically stated this was 1872, again reprinted in Christian Education, repeated elsewhere in different words. Parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parents should open before them God's great book of nature. The only schoolroom for children until 8 or 10 years of age should be in the open air, amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery, and their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. All right, so what do we see here? We see a program for early childhood education. Until what age? 8 or 10. Okay, very definitively outlined there, or specified there. Until 8 or 10 years of age, the teacher should be the parents, right? The textbook should be nature, and the classroom should be out of doors. Now that sounds like your average kindergarten program today, right? No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, we find the very opposite. Who are children's teachers these days? It's shifting more and more away from the parents at earlier and earlier ages, childcare at earlier and earlier ages. We find the textbook has definitely shifted away from nature, and the classroom is definitely not out of doors. And if we were to look at statistics around the world, we would find that the push has been in our desire for academic readiness, quote unquote, the push has been toward an earlier and earlier academic environment. What used to be a very play-based, hands-on environment, even in child care facilities, child care programs, kindergarten programs, used to be very hands-on, play-based. Even that has shifted to become more academic focused. And I could look at statistics from all over the world. I'm not going to take the time to get into that. But a lot of people are saying, well, that's okay. That's a good direction. We want to prepare them academically. Okay. Of course we do. Now, I would say as Christian parents, we have a different focus. We want to prepare them for heaven, not just for academics. Amen? Amen. Just wanted to make sure we're on the same page with that. But even if our focus was on academic preparedness, do we even realize that the science does not say that this push for earlier academics actually helps them academically? It actually says the opposite. Let me read here. There is no research evidence to support claims that earlier is better. By contrast, a considerable body of evidence clearly indicates the crucial importance of play in young children's development, the value of an extended period of playful learning before the start of formal schooling, and the damaging consequences of starting the formal learning of literacy and numeracy too young. So, really, I want to clearly define the point of what we're looking at here. The Lord said, until the age of 8 or 10, parents need to be the teacher. They need to be learning from out of doors, learning from nature, and there's a reason for that. When you read it in its context and you understand the reason that counsel was given, it is because there is a window of time in developmental stages. There's a window of time, science even recognizes this now, for the development of character. And the Lord was telling parents, don't worry about other stuff. Focus on what will develop a good character in the early years. And what is the world doing? It's doing exactly the opposite. It's saying we need to have academic preparedness, and so we need to focus on the training as early as possible. But what's fascinating about that is even if our focus was academic readiness, which it should not be, but even if that was our focus, do you know what the best thing we could do was or is? Follow the Lord's counsel and go outside and get our children involved in nature. The research is now showing that's the best thing we can do to prepare them academically. When we try to start too early, we're actually causing problems. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the science. So let's first consider some brain development. And I just want to state we're just looking at a very small snippet and generalization of these aspects of brain development. If we were to take time to go into it, this would be a university course, not a part of a talk here at camp meeting. But if we were to understand some basic aspects of brain development, there is an important element called myelination. Myelin is an electrically insulating compound that coats the axon of the neuron, and it speeds the information transfer. So when we see the brain developing, or when we see a child developing, and they're learning to walk and learning to talk and learning to reason and all these amazing skills that are developing, a lot of what is going on in the background is this process of myelination. So there's certain regions of the brain that develop at certain times, and what's going on is it's myelinating during that time, among other functions. But myelination of appropriate brain regions coincides with the development of specific cognitive functions, such as reading, development of vocabulary, and proficiency in executive decision-making. So if you were to just kind of say that backwards and say, if you want good decision-making, vocabulary, and reading, what do you need? You need some myelination to take place in the brain. Now, this process of myelination occurs in stages. And if you try to ask the brain to learn something for which it's not properly developed, you're just going to cause problems. So it's important that we know in sort of a schedule of how the brain develops, so we know when it's ready for what. So if we take, and again, this is a very broad generalization of brain development. From conception to around 15 months, we have very basic brain development. Then at around 15 months into 4.5 years, we have the limbic system and the relationship areas of the brain developing. And I want to pause and mention this is why it's so vitally important that the little ones are with mom as much as possible during these stages. That limbic system has a lot to do with the emotional security. And research is now showing us very clearly that babies and toddlers, it's through about age 3, 0 to 3, they need a permanent attachment figure. They need somebody there all the time. And into around 4.5 years, you see these relationship areas of the brain that are developing. They really need a connection during this time. And if you take them and you put them in childcare, you run the risk of lifetime damage of emotional health problems, anxiety, depression, and things like that later on in life. Now, from around 4.5 years approximately to about 7 years in girls and about 9 years in boys. You notice that's why there's a slash there. It's 4.5 to 7 or 9. It's about 7 in girls, about 9 in boys. Again, approximation. We have the gestalt areas of the brain developing. Now, boys do have that slower growth period in these regions. That's why it's about 7 girls, about 9 in boys. I don't really like saying boys are slow, but they are different in the way that they develop. And that's no surprise, is it? The world wants to tell us that, I wish we had the time to get into it. I don't have time to get into it. The world wants to tell us that gender is a social construct. Did you know you can dissect the brain of a baby before they're even born and tell whether it's a boy or a girl? Society has not had a chance to supposedly make them into whatever gender it is. No, God created them in a certain way, and there are brain differences, and we must work with those differences. One of the differences is that it takes a bit longer for the boys to get to our second stage. It's around 7 years in girls, around 9 years in boys, that we see the logic areas of the brain beginning their stage of development. That continues for many years. There's no real ending point there. Then at around 8 years, frontal lobe elaboration. And I just want to focus on these, particularly the first two, the gestalt and the logic areas of the brain. Now, these are often generalized into the right and left hemisphere. That's not technically correct, but it's a good generalization and an easy visualization. So we tend to, again, generalize to say that the left hemisphere deals with things like detail, parts and processes of language, linear patterns, logic, critical thinking, numbers, and reasoning skills. Whereas the right hemisphere tends to deal with things like images, rhythm, emotion, intuition, imagination, creativity, feeling, faith, belief, and large motor control. Now, if we were to compare these two regions of the brain and say, well, which one would we need for academic learning? Sit me down in the classroom, learn from a textbook. Which one would you need? Left, absolutely. Not going to say you're not going to use the right, but you really need that left hemisphere with the linear patterns, the language, the logic, the numbers, reasoning, all those things. Important for sit-down academics as we know them. All right, so let's just go back to our schedule here of development. We saw that the gestalt areas were developing into around 7 years in girls, 9 years in boys. The logic areas, that left hemisphere, which we saw was vital for academic learning, at what age does it begin its major stage of development? Around 7 years in girls, around 9 years in boys. Now, wait a minute. What's the typical school starting age? Yeah, 4. Some countries maybe 5, 6. But either way, it's before the very part of the brain needed for academic learning has even developed. Do you see a problem? Clearly, there's a problem. So just to say it succinctly so we can make sure we're all on the same page here, the areas of the brain responsible for many academic types of learning are not developed until around 8 years of age and even 10 in boys. We've looked at the one area that's around 7, around 9. Other areas are a bit later. So this lines right up with what the Spirit of Prophecy told us. Now, the question that would come up is, well, okay, I got that. Brain's not ready, but can't we speed this up somehow? Can't we accelerate the learning? No, unfortunately not. It's a myth that we can accelerate a child's developmental milestones. Children are kind of pre-programmed to reach those points. And I find that quite humorous, actually, that here's a scientist saying, well, they're kind of pre-programmed. And I say to myself, well, who pre-programmed them? God made it that way. There's stages of development, and we need to work with that. So to understand this properly, we need to understand how the brain is extremely plastic and constantly trying to compensate for its environment. And it will do so to its own detriment, almost, to a point. in its compensating to an incorrect environment, it may actually cause a later problem, is what I mean by to its own detriment. Let me explain. So let's imagine we have a child, they're in class, we're trying to ask them to learn something they don't have the correct brain region for, and so the brain's desire to compensate leads the brain to, let's just imagine it, just for sake of illustration, let's say the brain has a little conversation with itself, and it says, okay, I'm supposed to learn that, but that is way too advanced for any region that I currently have developed. So it needs a higher thinking center, but it doesn't have that. So it says, let me find somewhere just to try to do this learning through. Aha, okay, right here. Here's an area that has myelinated, it has developed, but it's a basic thinking center at this age of 4 or 5. It's not the correct higher thinking center that it needs for this academic learning. But it'll make do. And so the brain starts routing the thinking. It forms a neural pathway, learning habit, using the wrong part of the brain. Then let's fast forward a few years. We get to 8, 9, 10. Well, now it has the correct region developed, but it's got a bad habit through the wrong part of the brain. Because every day they're going to class learning the same subject. And so it might have the correct region, but they go to class, this is old hat, old habit, and so they just keep routing through the wrong part of the brain. That sounds, and it might sound like, well, okay, but at least they're managing. Well, the problem is this. You're going to reach a point at which it caps, and you have a learning disability. You have school burnout. You have, I hate that subject. And all those sorts of problems that are so common, we're actually creating many of these learning problems simply because we're pushing it too early. And it can take other forms. Let me give another example. Let's take math. How many of you have seen a child, or maybe you haven't seen it, maybe you experienced it yourself? You can calculate formulas all day long. But if someone gives you a real-life word problem, what's the response you get? Well, I don't know how to do that. What do you mean you don't know how to do it? Right there's the formula. You were just doing the formula. Yeah, I can do that, but I don't know how to do this word problem. You see, what's happening is when you start off with the basic thinking centers in math class, there's no connection to real life. It's just doing exercises on paper. You're not learning the concepts. You're learning by rote. And the brain can manage that with basic thinking centers. But when it comes to real conceptual learning, there's no connection with that. And so you give them a real life problem, and what they've learned in school has no benefit because they don't know how to put it into real life, don't know how to put it into practice. So if a task is asked of the brain for which the corresponding region is not matured, it will form neural routes through lower, more developed sections, resulting in almost permanent organizational damage. So trying to force a child to learn a concept for which they are not ready can actually do damage to the unmyelinated brain. And there's a lot of research that we could look at on this. We don't have time to get into it because there's a lot of other points that I want to add on to this topic. But we could spend hours poring over the research that shows this very, very clearly. And what often is caused is something known as learned helplessness. So the child who is required to learn things before he is ready may quickly tire of them, or he may become anxiety-ridden and so frustrated that he will not try at all. I often wonder how many children decide they are dumb about certain subjects, and I love that terminology. They're not dumb, but they've decided they're dumb because someone simply laid on the learning too soon in a form other than the one they needed to receive it in at the time. Plunge daily into the fire of inappropriate expectation, children's early promise shrivels. Non-learning becomes a habit. They may be labeled, treated, exhorted, and eventually tutored, but the basic issue remains unchanged. The school and the child are on different schedules. Again, there's a lot more that I could show on this, but I want to look at other points. If you have questions, you can put them in the question box, or if you want more research, you can just speak to me about it. So I just want to keep this practical. Parents, be patient. Teachers, be patient. Work with the schedule that God has established, rather than trying to push it before that the brain is ready. make sure you're also learning in practical hands-on ways rather than with books. And I want to emphasize this because sometimes when we talk about, okay, the brain's not ready for the academics, people think that this means they can't learn any academic subject in any form. No, not at all. We're talking about early formal academics. That means sit down with a textbook. But hey, can you learn math in the kitchen? Huh. Can you learn some math in the garden? Can you learn science in the garden? Right? The world is a classroom. You can learn academic subjects in everyday life. Just don't sit down with a textbook. And your most important focus during this stage is on character. This is a vital window of time to focus on character, and that's actually what is most important. Okay, let's talk a little bit about eye development. The eye teaming refers to your ability to use both eyes to focus on a subject. Foveal refinement, sometimes referred to as foveal focus, refers to two-dimensional focus. Both of those functions are vital for reading, right? Can you see how this is important for reading? You need to be able to track with both eyes. You need to be able to focus on the two-dimensional page. Those functions do not fully develop until approximately age 7 to 9 from a physical standpoint in both the eye and the development of the brain that enables you to see and actually understand what you're reading. The eyeball is not completely shaped with collagen fibers until approximately age 9. Long periods of reading without relaxing the focus into the distance could possibly cause inflammation and the elongation of the eyeball, leading to myopia. All right, so Dr. Hannaford mentions long periods. You may be wondering, well, what's a long period? Any more than about 15 minutes if we're talking about the young eye. So if we're talking about a child sitting in school for hours on end, this is absolutely linked to the inflammation of the eyeball leading to myopia. Do we all know what myopia is? Yes? Okay, it's a familiar term. Some countries call it nearsightedness, some countries call it myopia. It's the same term. It's the most common eye problem in the world today. The rates of myopia are going up around the world, and it's interesting because the research is showing very clearly that this is a lifestyle disease, even though most eye doctors historically have said that this is genetic. Now, let's explain something here. The normal eye is very rounded in shape with the focal point right at the back of the eyeball. The myopic eye becomes elongated in shape. Now, when you look into the distance, your eyes are at rest. But when you focus on something up close, like the printed page or your cell phone screen, the muscles that control the shape of the lens have to contract. We heard a little bit about that in the presentation this morning. The muscles that control the shape of the lens have to contract. And that's okay for a short period of time. This is called an acute spasm of the ciliary muscles. But as you're focused on something for long periods of time up close, this can start to lead to chronic spasm of the ciliary muscles in that they don't relax as naturally again. And this can begin to stress the eyeball and begin to stretch because they're attached into these outer layers of the eyeball. And the young eye is very soft, and so it begins to actually stretch the eyeball. So literally, long periods of focusing on something up close literally triggers the development of myopia if we're talking about during childhood. Now, it is recognized now by the science that people groups who spend more time indoors and go to school earlier and spend more time studying have higher rates of myopia. Let me give a couple of illustrations. The US, 50% myopic. That's pretty bad. East Asia, 90% myopic. East Asians spend far more time indoors, they go to school earlier, and the average East Asian child has double the amount of homework that the average US child has. Clear correlation between lifestyle. In Alaska, this is a state of the United States. They became a state, I think it was 1959. There were large populations of Eskimo, the Inuit, which traditionally had not gone to school, at least not at a very early age. Well then, when they became a state, the government required all the children go to school. So there was an interesting situation. All the children and young people had gone to school. The parents and grandparents had not. They waited, a few years, and they did a study on myopia. They found that the children were 60% myopic. Now, I have a question. If myopia is purely genetic, what percentage would you expect to find in the parents and grandparents? 60% or more, right? Because of age. Here's what they found. Can you see it? Less than 1%. And they said, wait a minute, this is not purely genetic. There was a study actually here on the continent of Africa, and I don't remember which country it was, but it was a country that was settled by the British, and which tend to start school pretty early. And it was a region, myopia was unheard of. Again, I don't remember which region of Africa it was, but it was unheard of to have myopia. People never complained of having vision problems like that. Well, then it was settled by the British, and they required all the children to go to school. So you had an entire region where all the children were going to school, starting at age 5. All of a sudden, they started having problems with myopia. It had never existed before. So it was purely lifestyle, had nothing to do with the genetics. And actually still today, just to compare these statistics, U.S., East Asia, compare this to the continent of Africa at large, is 10 to 20% myopic. And there's definitely lifestyle differences there. So these studies are just repeatable anywhere you go in the world. Natal, Brazil, within the city, 13.3% myopic. The tribes living around the city in the country, 2.7% myopic. Indigenous people, the upper Rio Negro region in the Amazon rainforest in northwestern Brazil, myopia was rare among the indigenous population. Age was not associated with the refractive errors of the indigenous people, and that's an interesting one because a lot of people want to blame it on age. Age was not associated. Brazilians from the small city in which the study was performed had higher rates of myopia, and older pre-education adults had very low prevalence of myopia, whereas the younger, slightly educated Brazilians had a higher prevalence of myopia. So 2 factors, city living and going to school. The low prevalence of myopia in the illiterate indigenous people is consistent with other studies and suggests that myopia is related to literacy. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we all go illiterate. The key is that usually literacy starts young, and there's a lot of reading at an early age. If we wait till the eye is developed properly and we begin the reading later, then we won't have that problem, and there's plenty of research to back that up. So 2 lifestyle factors in the development of myopia. Number 1, close-up work, especially at an early age, but it affects any age. Students at any age, young people. The amount of time you're focusing, especially on a screen, at things up close. Keep those time periods of limited, 20, 30 minutes of focus up close, then give your eyes a break. It's very connected with the development of myopia, but especially in childhood. The young eye is very sensitive. Also, the lack of time outdoors. And this, again, at any age. But they've done studies on children. They find children who spend less time outside were at a greater risk of developing myopia. So when they went outdoors, the rate of myopia lowered. Remember that the myopic eye is elongated in shape. Keep that in mind as we read this. Light stimulates the release of dopamine in the retina, and this neurotransmitter, in turn, blocks the elongation of the eye during development. When I read that, I said, whoa, wait a minute, huh? You mean light was blocking this from happening? That's what it says. Light was blocking the elongation of the eye. Light was blocking the development of myopia, basically. So, what kind of light? Children need to spend around 3 hours per day under light levels of at least 10,000 lux to be protected against myopia. All right, first of all, how many hours a day? 3. That's quite a bit of time. Do you know what the average amount of time a child spends outdoors is? Average? Less than 30 minutes. Less than 30 minutes. Obviously, there's a lot of regional differences, probably more in this part of the world. But children are not getting 3 hours a day. So 3 hours a day. Now, 10,000 lux. How much is 10,000 lux? Lux is a measurement of the volume of light. If you go outside on a sunny day and stand in the shade, you'd be getting about 10,000 lux. So it's not full sunlight, but it's full daylight. Heavy cloud cover like we have right now, it's a bit below 10,000 lux. But most days you're going to get 10,000 lux or more outdoors. But that volume of light that you get outside becomes dissipated into the volume of this room through the windows. So anyone want to hazard a guess what the average well-lit classroom or office is in a lux measurement? Who wants to go halves? 5,000 lux. All right. Who wants to say a quarter? 2,500. Anyone want to be pessimistic enough to say 1,000 lux? All right. You'd all be wrong. It's about 500. Far below what is necessary for proper eye development. The only way you're going to get that is to go outdoors. I have a friend who has severe myopia. She was 12 years of age, and she went for her yearly checkup at the eye doctor. And her doctor said, I'm sorry, but at the rate your myopia is progressing, you will probably be considered what's called legal blindness. It's not true blindness, but legal blindness in about 1 year. Can you imagine hearing that at 12 years of age? And the mother asked the eye doctor, well, doc, what's causing it? What do you think the doctor said? Genetic, yeah, genetics. Sorry, you and your husband both have bad eyes. There's nothing really we can do about it. So the mother was driving home. She goes, that doesn't make any sense. Because first of all, the Bible says the cursed causeless shall not come. Second of all, she said, my son, this young lady's brother, has perfect vision, better than perfect vision. So why does my son have near perfect vision and my daughter has this terrible myopia? So she did research. She found this research. She goes, now that's interesting because my son basically lives outside. I can't even get him indoors. Whereas my daughter hates going outside, spends all her time inside, reading, playing music, things like that. She said, interesting. All right, let's do an experiment. Talked to her daughter, said, you are now required. We're going to do an experiment. You have to go outside for at least 2 hours every single day. No, Mom, I don't. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You cry all you want. You're going outside 2 hours a day. So she went outside for a minimum of 2 hours every single day, getting this light. 6 months later, they went back to the eye doctor. He examined her eyes. He said, well, that's really interesting. I've never seen anything like this. Your myopia has not progressed at all. They said, thank you very much. They went home, didn't tell the doctor what they were up to. A year later, they're back at the eye doctor. He examined her eyes. He said, this really doesn't make sense. I've never seen this, but I have nothing else to say other than that your myopia has not progressed at all. And they told the doctor, well, here's what we found this research, and she's been going outside for a couple hours every day. He goes, nah, that's just coincidence. Clearly, it wasn't coincidence. This was God's method at work, right? And when God says children need to spend time outdoors, it's not only for the health of their body, it's for the health of their eyes, to protect their eyes. So again, just to clarify, children can become good readers with strong eyes, but it needs to wait. It needs to start later, or we risk damage to the eyes. So spend several hours outside every single day. Limit the close-up work and reading, and definitely limit and eliminate the screen time at an early age. This is particularly damaging to the eyes. All right. Now, we don't have enough time. I want to quickly move through some other points, very briefly, just going to mention them. Physical development. What are the two most common commands given to children in the classroom? Sit still. All right, very good. And be quiet. Wow. Have you heard that before? Right. So what about physical development? Have we seen some of the benefits of physical development? Have we seen how important it is? Right? Children need to move. And you take them, you sit them in the classroom, you tell them to hold still. You are damaging their development. We've talked about the cerebellum. We've talked about many things. Let me just mention one particular interesting point. There's something known as the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It is a chemical that is released when we move our muscles. And this chemical is required for myelination to proceed. It is essential for the process of myelination, which we've already seen, that's brain development. So, and how do we get this chemical? Exercise, exactly. Moving our muscles. Literally, children have to move for their brain to develop. You make a child sit still, you are preventing their brain from developing. They literally have to move. I think that parents need to go to the educators and say, why is my child sitting down for 6 hours a day when he's a 7-year-old boy and he needs to move? Fantastic question. And what were we told in Christian education? Small children should be left free as lambs to run out of doors, to be free and happy, should be allowed the most favorable opportunities to develop the foundations for strong, sound constitutions. Free as lambs. Now, I'm afraid we've misunderstood this a little bit at times, some people. And we think this means in the morning, okay, free as lambs, in the morning, give them breakfast. Then open the door. Come back at supper time. Is that what this means? You have any lambs here in South Africa? You have sheep? All right. We've seen the little lambs out playing around. Who's nearby? Okay, I hear the shepherd, yes, but who else? Mama sheep, right? Keeping a close eye. This is not talking about the absence of the parents. This is talking about the environment of the child, which means where does mom need to be also? Free as lambs, outdoors, yes. All right, so as much as the day of the day as possible should be active. Play together. Parents, play with your children. Spirit of Prophecy tells us this. Work together. This is important also. They can help you. It may not be help all the time, but you're developing connection, relationship. You're training them. It's important for development. Okay, now we saw telling them to sit still. What about telling them to be quiet? How many of you have ever seen a group of children playing? No, let me rephrase that. How many of you have ever heard a group of children playing? Are they perfectly quiet? No, absolutely not. They continue to talk. Now, what about one child by himself playing? Is he quiet? No, he's not. He continues talking. To whom? Yeah, to his toys, to the doll, to himself. It doesn't matter. He just keeps this running, it's called, there's a name for it, it's called a stream of consciousness speech. You see, children don't have something known as inner speech. This is something we develop as adults that we can think without having to say it out loud. We think out loud sometimes. It's okay, though. We have the ability to think without saying it out loud. Children actually don't have this. It develops around the age of 6 through 8 years of age. Children literally need to talk their thoughts out loud. So you see what's happening here? Take a child, put them in school, say sit still. Now their brain can't develop. You say be quiet. Now they can't think. Not a very healthy environment for development, is it? All right. This is one of the best things you can do to help you prepare your child academically. You think we're just wasting time sitting there talking? You are building the connections in the brain that will help them be a better reader, better reasoner, better thinker, and lay the foundation for emotional development, which is the next point I want to make. Emotional development is absolutely key, and we have not placed the importance upon it that we should. It is recognized by science now that emotional development lays the foundation for cognitive development. What is meant by that is a child must have their emotional security met, their needs for emotional security met. They must feel secure emotionally for them to feel safe about learning. This is because the brain views emotional security as a fundamental need of survival. What are needs of survival? Give me some. We don't know what we need to survive? Food, thank you. Okay, well, somebody's paying attention. Food, what else do we need? Water, okay. Air, shelter, warmth. A little more of it right now would be great, wouldn't it? These are what we need to survive, okay? Now, The brain views emotional security at an early age. The brain views emotional security just like you view food. I mean, it views food in the same way also, right? It needs food, it needs emotional security. Now, think of it this way. If you are out lost in the bush, truly lost, you have no idea where you are, it's getting late, it's getting dark, you've injured your foot, you have no shelter, no food, no water. At that point of danger and being afraid, none of your needs of survival are met, do you say, you know what, now would be a great time to learn algebra? Of course not. It's the last thing on your mind. Why? You're trying to survive. This is what the baby's brain, I say baby, this is a toddler's brain. It views emotional security as a need of survival. If it's not getting its emotional security needs, it doesn't really care about academic preparedness. So when you take a child at a young age, 4, 5 years of age, you send them off to school, you've disturbed their emotional security. They don't have that secure emotional base that they need for proper development. And this is actually why many times when we have a child with a learning disability, a good researcher is going to look at the home environment. And more often than not, they find a child with a learning disability, and there's abuse, there's neglect, there's divorce, there's something in the home environment that's actually triggering it. Not always, but I'm just saying often that's a factor. But the reality is a child needs emotional security to be able to feel safe to learn. So the best thing we can do to actually help them prepare them academically is to provide the emotional closeness in the early years. Now, somebody may be wondering, okay, can you define this a little bit? Sure. 0 to 3, they need a permanent attachment figure. They need somebody there all the time, preferably mom. That's 0 through 3. 4 through about 7 or 8, sometimes a bit longer, is the period at which they need a consistent attachment figure. You see the difference? One is constant, 0 through 3. The second one is consistent, meaning always available, but it doesn't mean that the child is always with the individual. But when you send them off, and now you've placed separation there where the child is not able to quickly come back to their place of safety, then you run the risk of damaging the emotional security. A lot more that can be said on that. But one of the best things, if you're just looking for something practical here, focus on relationship. Build a quality relationship with your child. And this is one of the best things you can do to build emotional security, which can actually then help them with their development of academics later on. Okay, now a question that may come up for some, what about social development? I've touched on that already this morning in terms of it's actually negative social development when a child goes and they spend the majority of their time with others of the same age. It's not helping them socially, because that's not true preparation for real life. True social skills are developed within a wide range of ages. So absolutely not necessary to go off to school. In fact, it can hinder them socially. Memory development. This is a fascinating one. Many people think, well, the school focuses heavily on memorization. Don't children need this training to help develop the memory? Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, if we look around the world, the people who spend the least time in school have the best memories. Let me read something here from a former professor of mine. The North Queensland Aborigines, speaking of Indigenous peoples of Australia, recite a song by memory that takes 5 nights to complete. There's a challenge for you, Shofar. A 40-hour song by memory. Primitive peoples can observe a herd of several hundred animals and detect the absence of a single animal and know which one it is without counting. Many of their vocabularies are full of names for very detailed aspects of the world around them. I remember spending some time in Tanzania, East Africa, at a school, and there was a mission there, and I shared on some of these things. And a lady came up to me afterwards. She was a volunteer from the U.S. volunteering there at the mission, and she said, "You know what you shared about people recognizing if they're missing a cow or something?" She said, "That's absolutely correct." I said, "Really? Tell me about it." She said, "Yeah, we have a livestock program here. We have a herd of cattle, and we hire Maasai to take care of our cows." And she said, "These men can, in the evening, they'll gather the cows and get water, and they'll just take a glance over the herd, and they tell their buddy, 'Hey, we're missing such and such a cow,' and they name the cow they're missing." And she said, "One day, I went and I talked to them. I said, can you tell me how to know when we're missing a cow?" And they looked at her like, "You don't know?" It was obvious information for them. No one ever taught them how to do that. It was just something they'd grown up with. And no, they never, it wasn't even something they gave a second thought to. And I think the connection is this. While the schooled person depends heavily on external signs, such as the written word, to hold knowledge for him, the primitive native depends on memory. Every detail of a landscape is remembered with what seems to be a photographic memory, even the first time passing through. But though most children have an eidetic memory, it is rare among schooled adults, but not among primitive non-schooled adults. So you see what's happening? Year after year, we're learning to depend on a book to hold the information for us. And we're actually hurting our brains in the process. So literally, children definitely do not need to go to the school environment for developing the memory. The natural environment that God has designed for children will develop the memory in a far better way. A friend of mine told me a story about a friend of his father-in-law's who was a missionary in some part of the continent of Africa. Again, I don't remember where it was, which region it was, but they were working in a very remote area, and he spoke at a church in a village, again, very remote, and delivered the sermon. Everybody appreciated it, and he left and never thought he'd come there again. Well, 2 years later, he went back to the same place, same village, same church, and got up to speak again. And as he got up to speak, he just made a little conversation, and he said, "Well, it's good to be back. How many remember when I was here 2 years ago?" And everybody said, "Yeah, of course we remember when you were here 2 years ago." And he was just being a little bit funny, and he said, "Oh, wow, great. Well, how many remember the sermon from 2 years ago?" And everybody said, "Well, of course we remember the sermon from 2 years ago." And he said, "Really? So what was it?" And they were a little confused for a moment. They said, "I mean, you just wanted the title, or did you want us to take the time to tell you the whole sermon?" And there were people there who could remember that sermon verbatim. They heard it once 2 years before. The mind is incredible when we live in a way that keeps the mind strong. Okay, now let me address something. This is a big question for a lot of parents and teachers. What about the question of reading? How should a child learn to read? At what age? We often are concerned that they learn to read early. We think that this is good preparedness. Let's first of all just take a step back and think logically about something here. In many schools, children are identified as behind with reading before they would have even started school in many other countries. This should just tell us something here. In some countries where they're starting school at 4 or 5, and a child's 6 and they're not reading well, and we say, "Oh, they're behind." Whereas in some countries, they don't start school until 7. Children are still playing outside at age 6. So what's on time? You see the problem here. You can't just say, well, at this age, what's the standard? What is important actually to understand is what the foundation of good reading skills is. This is what parents should be more concerned about, rather than any particular age at which their child learns to read. Lay a good foundation, and the brain will figure it out and put it together, because a child wants to learn. So, the Early Childhood Resource Quarterly, very respected journal, found that the foundation of later reading, and in particular reading comprehension, is Language. Okay, that's a simple one. How can we build language skills in children? Talking. That's a simple one. Every parent can do that. In fact, maybe I should say every parent is forced to do that by their child's million questions a day. Take advantage of that, actually. It's a great way to build vocabulary skills, and this is one of the best things you can do to lay a foundation for good reading skills. So talk together. That's step one. Second thing, answer the questions. The incidental learning opportunities that come up when they say, Mom, how do I write my name? Mom, what's that letter? Mom, what's that sign say? Mom, can you read me this book? Those little questions that come up, pause a moment. Teach them. And what you're actually doing is you're building a foundation for reading in the brain. And one day, when he's got enough pieces put together, that child's going to just teach himself how to read. I know that sounds shocking, but it is, honestly, I've lost count of the number of parents who have told me they followed this method, and one day their child just started learning how to read. Proficiently. I mean, I seriously have lost count, and I've lost count of the number of research articles I've seen that have shown the same. It's actually normal if we just follow God's schedule and we allow the child's brain to develop naturally, that they will just teach themselves how to read, because a child wants to learn. They want to figure out the world around them. And in some children, it might be at age 4 or 5. In other children, it might be at age 9 or 10. And it's okay. It's important to realize there is no one particular part of the brain responsible for reading. Reading is a whole brain activity that the brain pieces together. And you have to have a certain level of maturity and connectivity in the brain, which is built primarily through physical activity and these things that we're talking about here. And once the brain has reached a certain level of connectivity with a natural desire to learn, a child will piece it together and teach themselves how to read. I remember a mother told me the story of her son bringing her a book one day. He was about 6 or 7, I think. He brought her the book. He said, Mom, I'm going to read you a story. And Mom said, okay, go ahead, read me the story. She's expecting the book's going to be upside down. It's an invented story. Well, he opened the book correctly, and he read her the story. And she goes, but he doesn't know how to read. What's going on here? Oh, he's heard that story a lot. He's got it memorized. So she turned to another part of the book that he didn't know very well. She goes, read me that story. He didn't have that one memorized. And he read her the story. And she said, in her words, she goes, I was a little upset because I wanted to teach him how to read and he beat me to it. But then she realized that she had taught him how to read. It was just in little pieces here and there. And she never really thought about the fact that she was teaching him how to read. And one day he figured it out. So it's, how much more peaceful is that, right? Than the boring, drawn-out process that we usually try to make it when we teach it too early. They actually did a study here comparing two groups of children. This is measuring their average decoding and reading fluency. Two groups of children, one represented in the blue, who began to receive instruction in reading at age 5. Another in the orange, who received instruction at age 6. So, age 5, measuring their reading abilities, first group. Age 6, you have a few of the second group. They have not been taught how to read yet. They've only developed some abilities on their own. But then at age 7, you have the second group being taught. Then at age 8, let's pause the study right here. Let's compare age 8. Look how much farther advanced are the group who started earlier. And if you stop the study right there, what would we conclude? Better to start earlier. Look how much more advanced they are. Now think about age 8. We're often making a lot of comparisons in childhood at this age. Give it a little time though. Notice what happens between age 8 and 9. That group who started earlier did not advance very much. But the group who started later very nearly caught up. Look at age 11. Passed them. It was 2 years of wasted time to start earlier. 2 years of time that you could have been focused on character development and things that were more important. They did another study. 2 kindergarten classrooms. One kindergarten classroom, the students received extensive and thorough instruction and tutoring in reading skills. Second kindergarten classroom, 0 reading instruction. They just gave them science experiments to play with. Books in the back of the room if they wanted them. 3 years later, they compared these two groups of children. Which group of children do you think had superior reading skills? Well, clearly the ones who had received extensive reading instruction, right? Wrong. The group who had received 0 reading instruction were far more advanced in their reading skills than the ones who had received reading instruction. Why? Because the ones who had received no reading instruction, what were they doing? They were learning about real life. So when the time came that they were interested in reading, they had something to connect it with. And again, study after study after study that I could share. Keep it practical, talk together, read to the child, allow plenty of time for movement and activity, utilize the questions, engage in incidental learning. Okay, a couple of quick points here. We need to wrap up. The effect on boys. This is a very serious one. We need to consider, how should I start? What is God's purpose for our boys? Can we all just say to become men? That's becoming rare. We have 40-year-old boys now. What is God's purpose for our men? You can say it, it's okay. You don't have to be politically correct. What is God's purpose for our men? Leaders, spiritual leadership of the home, the priest of the home, godly leadership. Does Satan want this? No, he does not. Is he seeking to attack it? Yes, he is. He's doing it in many ways. This is one of them. Why? Because of that 2-year difference in brain development. All the negative effects we've seen become intensified in the boys. And so what do we see? Boys today are not learning as well as girls. They receive 70% of the D's and F's given all students. That's a U.S. grading system. This study was done there. It's referring to the lowest grades. Boys receive 70% of the lowest grades. Boys cause 90% of classroom discipline problems. We all chuckle, but it's true. 80% of all high school dropouts are boys, secondary school dropouts. Millions of boys are on Ritalin and other mind-bending control drugs. 3 out of 4 students labeled learning disabled are boys. If you look at ADHD statistics, by far the greatest majority of ADHD is among boys. God just created boys to be a problem, I guess. No, he wants them to be spiritual leaders. But do you see what's happening? You take a little girl, 6 years old, you take a little boy, 6 years old, you put them both in class. The little girl is going to survive. She's more developed. Not only that, but a girl's brain is more apt to learn from the sit-down academic environment. A boy, on the other hand, needs to move a lot. Like a lot. He's also developmentally behind from an academic learning standpoint. He's developmentally behind the girl. So what is it going to look like? The boy is behind the girl. So something's wrong with the boy. Right? The girl seems to be doing okay. The boy's not. Something's wrong with the boy. Okay, let's get him tested for ADHD. Right, he can't focus. Better give him some medication. So we sedate and feminize our little boys. The most common misdiagnosis is ADHD. Do you know what the correct diagnosis is? Boy. They need to move. God made it that way. It's okay. They need to run, they need to jump, they need to climb, they need to build towers, and yes, knock them down. They need some activity. You put them in school, you tell them, sit still, be quiet. You're going to have an explosion. It's not the boy's fault. It's been said we're treating boys like defective girls. This is really a serious issue and one we need to consider. All right? ADHD and other attention problems, I'm not going into that right now, other than simply to mention they did a study. They delayed kindergarten entrance by 1 year and found it reduced ADHD by 73%. Do you realize how big that is? 73% with a 1-year delay in entering kindergarten. Can you imagine if you just waited till 8 or 10? All right. Will they be left behind? Now, this is a question that comes up. All right, I got it. You've convinced me. By the way, I'm not the one doing the convincing. This is the Lord who has said this is the right thing to do. I'm just bringing forth the science to support what the Lord has already given us. But you may say, okay, I'm convinced. But how will they catch up? Good question. Let's do a simple example here. First of all, when the brain is ready, it's going to learn far more efficiently. And there is study after study after study that has shown this to be absolutely true. For example, in a study of 300 individuals who started school at age 8 or later, all of them quickly caught up with their classes and in most cases performed well above the class average. Another study, substantial agreement among school entrance age researchers that children who enter school later are significantly higher in academic achievement than those who enter earlier. So much I could look at here. Here's an important principle. All of the learning necessary for success in high school can be accomplished in only 2 or 3 years of formal skill study. And we say, come again? So why did I spend however many years in primary school? Let's explain something here. This is how school works. I'm not saying this is what is taught in each grade. I'm just going to give an illustration of how school works. Usually, start off in first grade. We're going to do some basic math. They have not learned it from real life, so you just have to do it on paper. The brain's not ready for it, and you have to do exercises after exercises after exercises. You have to do 3 plus 5 and 3 plus 4 and 3 plus 6 and 3 plus 7 and 3 plus 8 and 3 plus 9 because they don't really get it. So you have to do lots of repetition. Okay, but, you pass through first grade. Anyone have the answer? Thank you. Very good. Okay, so first grade. Now, second grade rolls around. What are we going to do? Well, we usually take the same subjects and we just make them more difficult. Again, the brain's not quite ready, so we have to do lots more repetition. 14 plus 16, 14 plus 17, 14 plus 18, 4 plus 19. And we passed through second grade and we managed to learn that. All right, anybody have the answer? All right, very good. So third grade rolls around. What are we going to do? Well, first of all, they've forgotten the previous 2 years, so you have to do some repetition. And you're going to take the same subjects. And yeah, I know, you're adding multiplication, division, all the other things too. But I'm just talking about the way we usually do curriculum. We take the same subjects year by year. We make them more difficult. So third grade, lots more repetition. You're making it more challenging. Anyone got the answer? All right, very good. Fourth grade, what are we going to do? Again, they forgot the last year, so you have to do some more repetition, review, and then more repetition of the same exact subjects, just more difficult. No one's listening to anymore. You're calculating. Anyone have it? Okay, I heard it. 2592. Very good. All right, the point here was not to do math. But the point here was to illustrate this is how we usually do school. Right? Year after year, repeat the same subjects. Let's suppose we did this differently. Let's suppose first, second, maybe even third grade, you didn't bother to open a math textbook. You just math from the garden, from the workshop. And you can do a whole lot more than addition. You can do multiplication. You can use geometry. You can even involve algebra. And a child learns the concepts of math. They know what it really means. And so they get to be age 8, 9, 10, whatever it is, and you say, okay. And let's just take this first one here, 3 plus 5. And you ask the child, what's 3 plus 5? And they say, well, that's 8. Easy, they know it, right? Okay, let me just show you something here. Take a piece of paper. You write the 3 here, you put the plus, you put the 5, you put the line, you put the 8 underneath it. That's how you do that on paper. Interesting. You think I'm making this up? I've seen this. Then you say, okay, well, let me show you how to do 14 plus 16. You know what that is, right? And they think a little, yeah, that's 30. Okay, cool. Let me show you how to do that on paper. You write the 14, the 16. This time you have to carry, right? You do the 4 plus 6, and you do the 0. You carry the 1, then you add the 3 ones, and you have the 0. The 3. Interesting. Then you throw a big number at them. Here, do this one. And they do it. 20 minutes, you've taught all of this to a child who already knows the concept. Do you see how much time you've just saved? How much time was wasted? So do you see what the Lord is really saying here? I want to emphasize this point. We focus a lot on what we should not be doing in this whole talk. Till the 8 or 10, they shouldn't be learning from the academics. They shouldn't be doing the formal academic environment. That's actually not what the Lord's point was. The point was, parents, you have a window of opportunity to develop character for heaven. And that's such a full-time job, you don't have time for anything else. So just as a little encouragement, don't worry about the academics. They'll learn them better if you wait. And so many stories I could tell of how true that absolutely is. Individuals even 11, 12 years of age hadn't done any academics. I'm not recommending that, but basically none. They come to school, in a matter of weeks, they're caught right up. So the point is that we have time to focus, and we come to our last point. We have time to focus on character development, spiritual strength. This is the most important aspect. If we fail to build spiritual strength in our children, then we've really failed at true education. And the early years are a window of time for developing spirituality, cause-to-effect reasoning skills, emotion, relationships, behavior management, language skills, memory, moral understanding, conscience, and character development, all developed in the first 7 years of a child's life. And, I just imagine Satan has his board of education. We know he does. And he sits there planning with his advisors, and he says, we all understand brain development. We know there's a window of about 7 or 8 years in which a parent has to develop character. That's the last thing we want Christian parents doing. So he's developed with his hellish arts and designs, he says, we've got to develop something to distract parents from focusing on character. I don't care what it is. And wow, what a masterful plan he's come up with. To sell us this idea that in order for children to do well academically, you've got to start as early as possible. He knows it's not true. Secular science says it's not true. They'll do better academically if they'll wait. But he doesn't care how well they do academically. What he cares is to get you distracted from focusing on character in the early years. So we have this counsel. Parents, especially mothers, should be the only teachers of such infant minds. In the context, it says infancy extends through the age of 6 or 7. They should not educate from books. Parents, I don't know how much more clear that can get. The children generally will be inquisitive to learn the things of nature. They will ask questions. Oh, wow. Children asking questions? Clearly. They will ask questions in regard to the things they see and hear. And parents should improve the opportunity to instruct and patiently answer these little inquiries. They can, in this manner, get the advantage of the enemy and fortify the minds of their children. Who wants the advantage of the enemy? Isn't this our goal? Now, let me just back up. It says they will be inquisitive to learn the things of nature. They will ask questions in regard to the things they see and hear. So if they're supposed to be learning from nature, if they're supposed to be asking questions about nature, where do they need to be? In nature. Many parents, they learn about true education. They learn, my child needs to be learning from nature. And they go buy a whole bunch of books about nature. No, you're still not learning from nature. You're learning from a book. The content may have improved. It might be about nature, but it's still not learning from nature. You've got to go out in nature. You've got to get out there. And I love how the book Education says nature itself will be the child's teacher. It's incredible. I'll finish with this simple example. Jesus gave a parable. He said, first the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear. And the book Education speaks, actually I don't know if it's Education. I don't remember the reference, but anyway, it's the Spirit of Prophecy speaks of how this is an illustration of child development. And how there's a peculiar beauty in the little blade. How many have planted corn, maize? Okay, quite a few. So imagine you plant it, and then you have really good weather. Hot, you get some rain. 10 days later, you go out, you want to check your maize patch, and you look, and what do you see? Some little plants coming up, right? So, what is your reaction at that point? I wanted corn. I don't have any corn. Is that what you say? No. You say, I have corn. But you don't have corn. You have plants. You say, yeah, I know, but I have the promise of corn. And if I give that little corn plant what it needs for its stage of development, I'll get a good harvest. But suppose you said, well, yeah, I get it. I have the promise of corn, but I want corn now. And so you reach down there and you take that little corn plant and you say, okay, it's a good start you're making, but we need to go along a little faster here. And you start pulling it up. Come on, let's go. Grow faster. Pour on the water. Pour on the fertilizer. Pulling. You'll just kill it, right? What do you need for a good harvest? You need to give it just what it needs for its stage of development, and you need to wait. At that stage, you need heat and rain, right? When the corn's dry, do you want rain? No, you don't. Every stage has its needs, right? Same for children. God says, here are the early years, parents. Quiet and simple. Keep them at home. Focus on character development. Give them what they need at that stage so you can have a good harvest later on. And God's methods work, always. Let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for your counsel to us. Forgive us, Lord, for how we have doubted your ways and looked to the ways of the world. Thank you for strengthening our faith through the modern research. Help us, Lord, not to depend on the world to prove you right, but to study your counsel and to obey. Give us wisdom and strength to move forward in obedience to your plan, that we may have a good harvest, as it were, that we may see that precious flock that you've given us saved in the kingdom of heaven. We thank you for this time we've had, and we ask all of these things in Jesus' name.